to our hydrogen talk, powering hydrogen, easing access to electricity. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that hydrogen can only help to decarbonize if it is basically made by renewable energy. My name is Yorgos Chatzimarkakis. I'm the CEO of Hydrogen Europe, and we are for many, many years now trying to find the best way to make this happen. Hydrogen Europe has built up quite a big sector, and that's why the sector creation was at the head of what we did, at the front of what we did the last years. And today, with more than 620 members, we want to be a strong player in bringing basically renewable energy and hydrogen together for a robust energy system in Europe. Where are we at the moment? I would like to guide you through, with the first slide, through some elements of our energy union and the Commissioner on Energy, that's Dan Jørgensen. He says there's a critical need to build a secure and resilient energy union, providing clean and affordable energy. That's, of course, at the forefront of what we want and what we need. And how can we strengthen the energy security and the resilience? And he says, well, the EU paid 375 billion last year to imported fossil fuels. That's high dependency on imported energy. And he is absolutely right in saying this needs to change. The EU needs to diversify basically the dependency on fuels. And with the build out of grids and considering the electricity needed to produce hydrogen, the EU needs to invest approximately 1 trillion in grids and flexibility by 2040. But you see, it's better to invest into a bigger grid to produce your own electricity and fuel rather than being dependent on imports. And we all see what is happening geopolitically. However, and that's next slide, that's another thing that Dan Jørgensen quite recently also said. At the moment, there are a lot of costs. And I just quote, please look at the red frame here. I just quote from what he says, I think it's a week ago, where he says that our grids are too small and they cause a lot of congestion, which goes hand in hand, unfortunately, with curtailment. So renewable energy that is not used, that is curtailed, plus redispatching. And in 2022, the costs in Europe were 5.2 billion, he says, and they could rise to, wow, 26 billion euro in 2030. So in 5 years, we pay a lot more for grid congestion. And then he says by 2040, up to 310 terawatt hours. And that's half of the renewable production right now in 2022. Half of it would be curtailed. That's not good. So we need to find a solution for that. Next slide. What's the challenge? The challenge has the shape of a duck. So this here is basically the typical use of renewables or production of renewables based on solar. There have been 77 gigawatt of renewable energy sources added in 2024. This is great. This is good. And most of it is solar. Spain, we come back to it later on, is one of the strongest partner countries here. But the stability of the grid is a central challenge for our energy system. As you see, the intermittency, and you can see it here, how the production goes over a day. Again, it's a typical duck. The duck curve shows that the net load is not covered by solar. And this here goes back to an ACER presentation from the Copenhagen Forum in 2024. And then, of course, because of this instability, we have incidents like this here. Yes, that's the Spanish blackout. This is a lesson that an increase in demand, response, and flexibility can provide grid stability. We have a lot of experts later on our panel who can explain exactly what happened. However, flexibility is essential for this robustness of a system. And of course, we believe that hydrogen can play a role because also of creating a redundant system. Once you have a redundant system, you can avoid these kind of mechanisms. Next slide. The negative prices, because of the instabilities that we described before, are soaring up. There is little grid capacity available at the moment, including for hydrogen. And you see here on the right-hand side, that's the annual percentage of the time when prices were negative. And that's a clear signal that in some countries you really have an alert zone. So we need to be more eager to understand how can we bring the prices down. Of course, create more grids, but the question is it just power grids, or is it the combination of electrons and molecules? Now, where are we with hydrogen, by the way? Where are we with the uptake of hydrogen projects? On the next slide, we see that with the current project pipeline on electrolyzers and on basically projects that could help with these electrolyzers, we are not where we wanted to be clear. Only 20 to 30% of the NCEP ambitions will be achieved by 2030. So we need, in order to tackle the situation, we need around 15 gigawatt of electrolyzers, most of them grid connected, in order to lead to system integration. But TSOs need to plan with hydrogen in mind. Otherwise, we will fall short of the NECP targets. And this is why we have this discussion today. So what can we do in order to have a better planning? For the hydrogen sector, the affordability, that's the next slide, of electricity is also the most important cost driver, right? So 2/3 of the price of hydrogen, of green and renewably produced hydrogen, are electricity costs. And if they go up, of course, you can clearly see it here in the red frame again. So this is basically the electricity price, and it's the biggest chunk of the price of hydrogen. And this is why the access to affordable renewable electricity is the most important factor determining the financial viability of a project. And the better access to cheap electricity, the better for the hydrogen business, electrolyzers, and vice versa. The more hydrogen closely linked to grids, the better for the grids to be robust, to be stable, and to reduce costs. So hydrogen requires high investments in renewables and in grids, but hydrogen also attenuates cannibalization effects of renewables and congestion. Now, let us discuss about this, and let us start with a keynote speech of one of the most prominent members of the European Parliament, not only in this respect, in general. It's Nicolas Casares. He is member of the S&D group in the European Parliament, and he is the renowned expert in everything energy in his group, and especially also stemming from Spain, from one of the most prominent producers of all these ideas. We are privileged and honored, Nicolas, to have you today here for your keynote. And without further ado, I would like to give you the floor. Nicolas, hola.
Thank you, Giorgio. Don't put these high expectations on me, okay? I'm a policy maker, but not this very big expert that you mentioned before. But anyway, thank you for the compliments. And thank you, first of all, to all many participants and to others in Europe for organizing this webinar. I think that we are dealing now with different trends in European institutions. First, let me say that there are many groups, many people trying to back on the European Green Deal. And let me say first, decarbonization and competitiveness in Europe must go hand in hand. This is the only real solution for Europe. Decarbonization also is the major driver for competitiveness in Europe, very clearly. And the Clean Industrial Deal must be built on the European Green Deal, not against the European Green Deal. Create decarbonization opportunities going against the European Green Deal only redirect us to the disaster. And I think this is essential to know for the future of our industry. We just completed the regulatory framework for clean hydrogen with the delegated act. Now we have also the development of the renewable and low carbon hydrogen that I think that at European level also will play a role. So we now have the different pieces and a clear legal framework. We completed the puzzle in order to have new opportunities and clarity and predictability for the industry. Let me start by saying with some thoughts about the affordability of electricity for hydrogen. You know that high energy prices in Europe are not only unfair for the people, are also a burden for companies and for industries. So we had to lower this burden, to reduce this burden. And it's essential to manage, to pass the affordable prices from renewables to the citizens and business. So it's essential also for hydrogen, particularly for hydrogen. If we want to produce renewable and green hydrogen and also low carbon hydrogen, it's crucial to have access to cheap electricity. We have made some steps already in this direction with the electricity market design reform and the RED III, for example, by encouraging to increase the amount of CFD and PPAs as tools to decouple electricity prices from the volatile gas markets. I think you mentioned Spain is a good example as a leading European market on PPAs that I think there are essential tools in the toolbox to promote and to develop hydrogen projects. So the results are already visible. We can reduce electricity costs in the spot market and, of course, reducing imports from fossil fuel and reducing dependencies from outside the EU. So this means also that we can increase our competitiveness. In Spain, average electricity prices have decreased by almost 50% since 2019 and have saved a lot of money to consumers and to industries. So, of course, much more must be done to ensure affordable energy. Countries first should implement the provisions of RED III and the electricity market design. I also had to say that regarding the electricity market design and the spot prices and the system that the spot prices are produced, the European Commission has to make, due to the electricity market design reform, a review of the short-term market functioning by June of 2026. Next year, in the middle of the next year, the Commission should have an assessment of that and, if it's needed, propose a revision of these short-term markets and the function of the short-term markets. And third, advance on the energy union is key. We have also to make a good revision of the energy tax directive. But of course, we cannot forget a missing piece of the past. There is impulse, green development, and of course, flexibility. You mentioned the Spanish blackout. First, the things that we know from this blackout is that renewables didn't cause the blackout. Of course, we can have problems with the new mix, renewables penetrating in the mix, getting higher and higher, and we have to find new solutions. First, grids are essential. A grid development, better interconnectors, and of course, a better distribution. But of course, we have to increase the demand side flexibility. And I think the proposal to design tariff methodologies that incentivize flexibility use is crucial. Attractive remuneration conditions could incentivize the adoption of flexibility solutions in some sectors. Regarding system flexibility, the curtailments and negative prices that we experience as our energy system transitions to higher share of renewables make necessary a new push to move towards increasingly grid-scale storage infrastructure and the hybridization of renewable projects. I think cohesion funds could also be exploited to invest in national storage capacities to increase system flexibility and on grids to unlock the new necessities. And talking about grids, we clearly need more investments in grids, but at the same time, we have to avoid the translation of grid investments into higher costs and electricity bills to our consumers. And I think that here we need better interconnectors in Europe. I hope the grid package and the newly announced Energy Highways initiative can give Europe a new push in this direction. But I think that here hydrogen can play an important role. Hydrogen can also help us in order to manage the grid. Electrolysis, for me, is a piece that is a link for electrification and decarbonization. It can absorb the excess of renewable energy in our systems during surplus generation times. For example, we have an excess of wind or solar on hydro, and serving somehow at a grid scale battery, because we need batteries as a storage, water storage, chemical storage to traditional batteries, of course, but we need also hydrogen and hydrogen projects helping the grids to stabilize and take advantage of the surplus of renewables in some cases. And in addition, we can enable the possibility to reduce negative prices. Negative prices are making that some business don't want to invest in new renewables. We need additionality for hydrogen. But with these very low prices, if you are going to obtain almost nothing for your investment, probably you decide not to invest. So we have to give signals. I love affordable prices, but affordable prices not always means cheap prices. I mean, zero prices are not fair. Affordable prices are fair for consumers and also for generators. In this case, I can see that hydrogen players and hydrogen projects can play a role that can leverage the system. So, and of course, you transform electricity into energy and storage. So, I mean, into energy storage, not into energy, of course, the energy consumption. So, in this case, we have to boost renewables, we have to boost grids, and we have to increase the electrification of our system. To Europe, it's essential to run towards electrification. We are lagging behind, and I think that we have different careers alongside energy infrastructure and consumption sectors. So electrification means using homegrown clean electricity to power our industry, our buildings, and our future mobility. But of course, electrification also enables more possibilities and more options to hydrogen to be produced at cheaper prices. I mean, with more renewables, with more people using electricity and taking this flexibility as an opportunity, we can create a better environment to produce hydrogen through electrolysis. Optimizing the energy system to deliver decarbonized, reliable, and resource-efficient energy service at the low possible cost. This is the goal, and this is the framework. And here, clean hydrogen is key. Other countries like China are already ahead of us, winning this race. So following the clean industrial target, we must accelerate electrification, moving from the current 23% electricity served on energy consumption to the 32 by 2030. At least go to 30%. Now China is above 30%. However, the electrification plan will be in principle just a communication. We have to push Commission. We need to electrificate our energy system. So we need legislative and initiatives, measures that can drive us to achieve that. There are some people concerned about the future of some hydrogen projects. We have to give clear signals. Invest in renewables, energy storage, power to X are going to be solutions, not only for Europe, also that creates profits to the companies. But we have to think not in the short term, in the medium, long term. But remember, 2030 is almost tomorrow, and we need hydrogen, affordable hydrogen, as soon as possible. Thank you so much.
Many thanks, Nicolas. You said very, very important things, especially you love affordable prices. That's very, very good. I think this should be something we all should have in mind when looking at the electrification. It needs to be affordable. And then you mentioned the demand side flexibility. Here, Spain is really a front runner, I have to say, because refining projects that use hydrogen in desulfurization, so in the chemical process, they are a very, very interesting demand side. We will later on listen to Moeve, which is a Spanish player and a front runner in this case. And I would say it's very, very important to regard these off-takers as helpers to bring down the cost and to make them affordable and to give more stability to the grid. Muchas gracias. Thanks very much for that keynote. We'll keep on discussing that together with you, Nicolas.
Thank you very much and gracias.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias a todos los españoles y a todos los oyentes.
Thanks. Gracias. That was the keynote by Member of Parliament Nicolas Casares. And that brings us now into our H2 Talk discussion with some participants. Next slide shows us that today we have 6 distinguished participants here. We have Geroid Fitzgerald, who is the representative from Ireland. That's the not next, but after that presidency. He's in the Department of Climate, Energy and Environment. We have Edwin Hazen, who is the head of system development section at ENTSO-E, a very, very important player in that respect. Olivia Pilar Infantes Morales. She is the Director Hydrogen Regulation at Moeve, just mentioned the company. We have Carmen Longas. She's the head of Grid Access Department in Red Eléctrica, a company that is most knowledgeable on the Spanish case that we mentioned earlier on. Rafael Cosent, a joint researcher in Madrid, at the Universidad Pontificia Comillas. And last but not least, Raul Montano. He's Global Solutions Manager for Hydrogen at Hitachi Energy. So we'll come to all of you, but I would start with Geroid, representing a country that has a very, very high electrification rate. But as far as I understand, you have also high demand, especially by data centers, because Ireland has become one of the front runners into that direction. Gerard, Ireland as an island system faces unique challenges in integrating renewables and in the near future hydrogen. So we know that hydrogen is on the top of the agenda also in Ireland. How do you see the possibility for hydrogen to contribute to grid stability and security of supply in such a system in the coming years? How do you design the legal and regulatory framework for this? I'm asking you not only as an Irish representative, but also as next year, 26 second half EU presidency.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, we've got some unique challenges here in Ireland. We are an island system, so we're not synchronously connected to another country. We have a number of interconnectors with Great Britain, and we've one being constructed with France, but we have still got a very high level of renewables on our system. So it's about 42% of our electricity comes from renewables, and we've got a 75% limit on our non-synchronous generation, which is going to grow in the next number of years. And I suppose in the near term, the big opportunity for hydrogen to help with that is around that demand flexibility. So the initial projects which are being touted for Ireland really will come into the role of supporting the grid for a stability point of view on demand side management. But the challenge we have in Ireland as we start to look at beyond 2035 and start looking at very tight carbon budgets for our electricity sector, and also balancing a continuous growth in our electricity demand, some of it driven by new data centers, some of it driven by existing data centers, stepping into AI, but also the electrification of the other modes of energy usage within the country. So transport, domestic heating, and also industry. More and more electricity will be consumed. Up to 53% extra energy electricity could be consumed by 2050. So the role that we see for hydrogen, it's emerging a kind of a consensus across the modeling which is being done that hydrogen will play a big role. But the challenge for us is that we have to scale up to that very, very quickly. So the work I'm doing here, leading the Hydrogen Task Force within the department, and across a number of different departments and government agencies, is working now to make sure we have all the legislative frameworks in place to allow hydrogen to be developed and regulated correctly for when the scale is needed. And our issue is that we don't have an intermediate step for green hydrogen, where we have, like other countries, a large existing hydrogen consumer. We don't have that in Ireland. We only have desulfurization of fuel in our one oil refinery. So we have to plan now for a very large scale up for hydrogen storage, hydrogen transportation, hydrogen production. And what we're doing to do that is that we are really tackling it from the point of view of ensuring that a roadblock which isn't going to be there is the regulatory and legislation frameworks to enable it. So we're planning ahead now and implementing those today for developments which will need to be there in 10 years' time.
That's good to hear. I was last week in Cyprus, which is another island taking up the EU presidency as of January. Similar issues, maybe not that big impact of data centers, but looking forward, of course, to you guys teaming up in two islands, having this electrification issue and doing something also for balancing it out via hydrogen. Let's come to Edwin. Edwin Hazen is the head of section on system development at ENTSO-E. And this is the European Association of Electricity, TSOs. That's the expert basically on how to make these electricity grids faster, more robust. And his work area supports the 40 European TSOs, and among others, the Pan-European 10-year network development plan, the European Resource Adequacy Assessment and Seasonal Adequacy Forecast. So the right guy to answer all these questions, why we have these incidents like in Spain. What can we do? And it was not only Spain, it was also Portugal, Iberian. What can we do in order to get out of it? Edwin, ENTSO-E develops long-term scenarios jointly with ENTSO-G. So that's your partners on the gas grid. And there's a new baby born, that's NOH. So that's basically the same body for hydro networks. but including hydrogen demand in production, the 10-year network development plan, you are basically working there together with them. How large is the role of hydrogen in those scenarios, in particular related to their electricity demand increase, which was always called the cannibalization issue? How ENTSO-E sees power to gas units contributing to flexibility in the electricity system? No easy question, but you will help us now. Edwin.
Thanks, Jorgo. First of all, thanks for having us, of course, and thanks for inspiring a good debate across sectors, electrons and molecules coming together, aiming for the same targets, of course. Thanks very much for highlighting your question around our T1EP, our 10-year network development plan. It's our flagship product as ENTSO-E. It guides our TSO members, it guides decision makers, it guides all stakeholders about what do we need in terms of interconnected grid infrastructure across Europe. Shifting a bit away from the question, I was a bit inspired by your slides at the start, Jorgo. Thanks for showing some numbers from Acer, from the commissioner. I would like to take the opportunity and quote a few figures indeed from our T1EP product, our 10-year network development plan, because you correctly highlighted the challenge is enormous in terms of targets to aim for and the cost it entails only for building grid infrastructure itself. But I want to emphasize our calculations of our T1EP emphasize time and time again. Yes, it's a large cost, but it's net beneficial for society. So you quoted some numbers from the commissioner for all grids in total. We did the calculation with our TSO members. For transmission investments, it's close to 800 billion euros towards 2050. That's probably an underestimation of what is needed. On top of that, of course, a lot of investment in distribution grids and, of course, in gas hydrogen grids. It all adds up. But at least talking about transmission interconnection, our calculations show every euro invested in transmission interconnection, society gets 2 euros back in terms of lower operational costs. And yes, there are challenges of negative prices and risk curtailment, like also Mr. Casares highlighted. But we also show every time in our T1EP, not doing anything, not investing in grids will make the cost even higher. If the whole T1EP portfolio would not be implemented in time as our plan foresees, we would have an additional risk curtailment of the size of, give or take, Belgium or Netherlands in terms of total energy demand, which is quite substantial, of course. But then to come to what we take from our analysis for hydrogen in particular, so indeed the T1EP, it's becoming a collective exercise across sectors, especially scenario development, which is the starting point for grid planning. It's a truly collaborative exercise across sectors with ENTSOC, also with the NOH colleagues, even though they're still being established, but also with all stakeholders. I dare to say that our T1EP scenario development, it's the most debated topic with all sectors in Brussels and across Europe because it's important. A lot of information is being shared in terms of data methodology, and we need the input from all sectors to see if we're right on the ball, of course. So hydrogen started, of course, emerging in a few T1EP editions ago already. We're now very busy finalizing our T1EP 26 scenarios. We had a consultation on our assumptions over summer, and thanks, I must say, to many people I trust are dialed in here today for the feedback they're giving on our consultation. So yes, hydrogen is booming, but also projections are becoming more moderate or more realistic. I think it deserves a debate at least, yeah. So what we saw is that, again, long-term projection towards 2050, hydrogen demand would count for about 2,000 terawatt hours of electricity production. Low carbon supply, of course, we assume. That's 1/3 of total electricity demand in Europe. That's massive, of course. Looking a bit more intermediate towards 2030, 2035, and the previous speakers already mentioned, that's practically tomorrow. Our projections still show that in 2030, we see about 55 gigawatt of electrolyzers entering into the system. That's not a back of the envelope calculation. It's not some TSOs making an estimate. Our T1EP scenarios have to take NECPs, National Energy and Climate Plans, as their reference. And there we see quite a bit of fluctuation, quite a bit of shifting the needle, quite a bit of maturity coming into the projections. So it's lower compared to T1EP 24. I very much value also the effort Hydrogen Europe does in making market projections. Your monitor report is really a flagship product as well to take into account. Where at the bottom up, you see lower projections. And then the question is, what is it going to be for 2030 and 2035? Because planning a grid, planning a system, it's a hard engineering job. It's coping with uncertainty. What are we essentially aiming for? So very much looking forward to what stakeholders will say about the T1AP scenario edition coming out now, of course. Then to come to your question about flexibility, again, I would invite everyone who's interested in our calculations to look into our T1AP scenario report and our T1AP product itself. 2030, hydrogen is showing a bit of a building block for flexibility of the power system. Towards 2035 and 2040, given the vast volumes, definitely becoming a large cornerstone together with gas units, together with batteries, together with demand flexibility as well. So a lot of it to be taken from those reports. Perhaps I pivot to the other question you also asked, Jorge, if you allow me, about the Spanish situation, and let the colleagues comment on this one. Just to remain very factual, it was a tragic incident, of course. It was also a very complex incident from an engineering perspective. So there's a formal process we follow it, and so we, together with stakeholders, to take the findings and the conclusions from any large-scale incident. We published a few weeks ago what we call a factual report. It's a vast amount of data to show simply what happened in the system, based on a clear process with TSOs and regulators and Acer together at the table, coming up with this report. It is complex, to say the least. What do we take from that? The actual recommendations are still to come out in a few months' time. The colleagues are hard working on this one. But apart from the discussion on the supply mix, which I heard you say as well, I would like to raise also a point that, given it's very complex and technically challenging, it's about being prepared to manage a system when new players enter into the system. The factual report showed it was mainly caused by overvoltage, which raises the question again, how do we cope with connection procedures, connection requirements of all the assets in the system? And if new assets enter into the system, because to be fair, connection codes were developed before we were talking about hydrogen and electrolyzers, those connection codes were not designed with those attributes into mind. And we're developing now the connection requirements to allow electrolyzers to safely enter the system and support the system. And at the same time, we see that connection code amendments are still a bit stopped and blocked in the legislative process. Again, a call for action, because I think what we all want to avoid is that every country goes in their own direction and starts developing their own connection code requirements, which I trust you as an industry would regret to see happening, of course. So if you can take one finding, at least a bit prematurely, from this incident, I would say let's pay attention also to connection requirements to help the industry and help the power system itself. And I'll take a break here. Thanks, Jorge.
That's already a lot of good answers to these questions. Thanks. Yes, it's complex, and indeed we need to find ways in overcoming this complexity. Maybe by players in the system in Spain that are, I mentioned it during Nicolas Casares after his speech, that can be off-takers in order to stabilize, to bring down high voltage. And here we go. We have one of the off-taker here, Olivia Pilar Infantes Morales. She's Hydrogen Regulation Director at Mueve, one of the companies that can play this role and is basically, I always say, a role model when it comes to a company in transition, not only by changing your name from Cepsa to Mueve, but also in really transforming your whole business. From a project developer perspective, Olivia Pilar, what are the main challenges that you are envisioning to ensure grid access for your hydrogen projects? Because this is what you need. What regulatory changes we should envision to ease this hampers, to ease the situation and the integration of hydrogen in the electricity system? We heard by Edwin it's welcome to have this, but how can this work even better? Do you think hydrogen can provide flexibility to the grid operations? Olivia.
Okay, thanks, Jorgo. Thanks for giving me the room to speak and for inviting us to participate in this H2 talk. Well, as many of you know, Mueve is developing the Andalusian Green Hydrogen Valley, a project aimed at installing 2 gigas of electrolysis capacity, one in each of our energy parks, meaning Huelva and Cádiz. The hydrogen produced, mostly RFNBO, will be used to decarbonize our own activity, those of our partners in the region, and to produce low carbon molecules such as ammonia, methanol, and eSAF, supporting the decarbonization of both maritime and aviation sectors. This project has been under development for more than 4 years, so we have a lot of experience to share. And we are now approaching the final investment decision for the first phase in Huelva, that is called Onuba, with 400 megas. Well, of course, a key success factor for this project is grid connection. In a world where decarbonization increasingly means electrification, the electricity grid has become one of the critical bottlenecks for all industrial developments. Our grid capacity request was filled in October 2022. Just for you to know, the Andalusian Green Hydrogen Valley is included in the first list of projects of common interest and has received several step seals. So this is a mature project in Europe, I would say. Now, in terms of this connection capacity, more than 3 years later, we are waiting for the resolution of a tender, which we'll hope conclude positively. We really believe it, but we are still waiting for it. We hope to have it before the end of this month, maybe, or beginning next month. But we already know that we will not receive the full capacity initially requested. Available capacity those days was limited from the start because of the available infrastructure, and since then, due to certain regulatory gaps, part of it has been allocated to other developers. 3 whole years for a project with anchor demand, several recognition and public funding received from Innovation Fund, the European Hydrogen Bank, Per Teravalles, to be allocated a reduced connection capacity. That was we have experienced. Based on that experience, what needs to change in the regulatory framework to ensure fair and efficient access to the grid? In our opinion, 3 specific issues. First, as grid has become the system's scarce resource, and new grids face increasingly social opposition, capacity that is available today must be allocated smartly to credible projects that will actually be built, something that has mentioned the guy from ENSOE. We really have to believe what projects are going to be built, and to projects with sufficient scale to deliver competitive prices and act as a catalyst for the entire value chain, from electrolysis manufacturing till, for example, vessels adapted to ammonia or methanol, everything. Second, timelines have to be significantly reduced. We cannot wait 3 years for a grid capacity allocation. Something has to be done on that issue. And finally, third thing, we must not forget renewable generation behind these projects. Capacity holding by renewable developers who neither build, neither negotiate has become a real barrier in Spain, and I would say that in the whole Europe. Their permits last up to 5 years. Meanwhile, developers willing to really negotiate with us and sign the PPAs that we are all asking for from European with the market reform. Those willing really to negotiate and offer competitive prices are left there without access. Without them, achieving competitive LCOH is almost impossible. So from our point of view, this issue must be solved if requirements of the RFNBO delegated acts are really to be met. Finally, you have asked me about flexibility, but I would say that I will talk about it deeply in my next question. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So you mentioned timelines and permitting. And this brings me to something that Nicolas said in his speech, China. Because in China, well,
the opposite.
it's the opposite. A year ago, we would have said, yeah, we still can catch up with China in order not to let the same situation happen like with photovoltaic panels and batteries. Now, 1 year later, I have to say they simply do it. They just do. They don't talk. And yeah, and I wish you good luck. We come back to your next point later on. Good luck for the licensing of this one project within this month. So it will be in the next days. Because it's a flagship project for the whole of Europe. I'm saying that because one of the most important elements here will be the Spanish TSO, and it's a real honor to have Carmen Longas here. She is representing Red Eléctrica, which is the Spanish TSO, and she works there for more than 15 years, first in the integration studies, grid stability studies, and connection network codes regulation drafting. So she is a real expert here, and I'm very grateful to have you here. And also at the EU level, you have been, as a member of ENTSO-E, of course, actively involved and working together with Edwin with ENTSO-E there. And since 21, you are the head of the Access to the Grid department at Red Eléctrica, which is in charge of issuing access permissions for generation consumers. Happy to have you, Carmen. My question to you is, this flexible demand that Nicolas mentioned, that has been mentioned many, many times, could play a crucial role in grid stability, of course. How can hydrogen plants help to modulate demand in sync with renewable generation, and what conditions are needed for them to participate effectively? Is Spain implementing flexible contracts? And of course, we mentioned the Spanish case and the blackout. Of course, you are more knowledgeable than anybody else on that, so please don't refrain from also commenting on this.
Thank you, Giorgio. Thank you very much also of Hydrogen Europe for inviting me and Red Eléctrica to participate in this interesting webinar. Quite Spanish focused. I didn't know that it was going to be like that. Okay, so you are asking me which benefits, which is the role and grid stability of hydrogen. Okay, well, first, just a brief introduction. In Spain, we are facing a growth, significant changes in terms of renewable power. Okay, we are facing more than 5, 6, 7, maybe this year even 9 new renewable gigawatt of renewable power new in the system, so it's quite challenging to adapt. Okay, and well, in the balancing perspective in the Spanish system, we are facing scenarios with market curtailments. Let's say moments where all the generation doesn't fit with the demand, because we are not facing an increase in demand. Okay, in the Spanish system for the moment, maybe for the because of the self-consumption. Okay, but we are not facing that. Okay. Maybe that it's the key issue, and why Spain is so important. Okay, we don't know. Well, benefits of the hydrogen that I see. Well, besides the already mentioned electricity certification, decarbonization, from the point of view of the system, we can see an increase of demand that now it's seen as very necessary. Personally, TSOs see that probably this maybe not at the beginning, because we are looking to hydrogen as a demand, okay, firm demand with all the rights that have the other consumers. Maybe this would be like that in the beginning, but of course, taking into account the nature of the process behind, probably this is a kind of demand that can be more flexible, can deliver more services, more performance to the grid, and this is a good news for us like TSOs. Okay. And well, this is a new energy vector. Okay, this has to have coordination between sectors, and it has to be managed. Okay, you asked me, are we implementing flexible solutions in Spain? Well, for me, the challenge of this question is to define flexibility, because we all speak about flexibility. Each one speak about flexibility depending on our needs. Okay, so let's see what we are doing in Spain related to flexibility. Okay, we have already in operation since 2022 a service that is a market service. Okay, that is called the SRAD. This is the service for the active participation of demand. Okay, this is a market that is supervising that we don't run out of spinning reserves. Okay, so when we run out as a system of upwards spinning reserve, we activate the system. Okay, and Red Eléctrica sends a signal to all the participants, and in 12.5 minutes, this this consumption shall be reduced. Okay, this is a flexibility product probably because it is allowing not to over-dimension reserves, to take into account the extreme situations where we can go out of reserves. Okay, but this is a market result. This doesn't take into consideration congestions and so on. Okay, because we have another different product which is not already in operation. Okay, this is a flexible solution which is called the flexible access to the grid permission. Okay, and this is like, I would say, relevant this year because our National Regulatory Authority has launched this definition. Okay. And well, I would say that this is an approach that would help to optimize the grid, okay? Because TSOs have to guarantee the security of supply. That means when anything happens in the grid, we have to guarantee this. This is our like mandate, okay? And of course, this fact is making not to utilize the grids at the 100% capability. Okay, so this product, flexible access permission, allows to calculate a bit more of capacity in the grid, taking into consideration that sometimes the grid can fault. Okay, that can have a fault, can have an element that can be disconnected, and only in these situations we can disconnect demand. Okay, so this would allow to optimize the use of the grid, to optimize the existing infrastructure that it is very, very important, and to allow to connect more participants who want to have this kind of considerations. Okay, but you have talked about grid stability, and for me, flexibility in terms of active power management is not grid stability. Okay, for me, grid stability, to guarantee grid stability, we have to go towards Edwin's discussion. Okay, I am 100% aligned with him. Okay, it is very important to define minimal technical requirements for those new players that are coming here. We saw effectively in the blackout that you have mentioned. Okay, I'm not sure that an active power management of loads could have avoided that. It is another kind of things. It is a small stability event and voltage event. So I'm not sure that flexibility, in terms of what we often say, flexibility would have helped. Okay, but for me, it is essential. It is urgent to take these requirements and to just push the implementation of minimal technical requirements for all those new participants that are coming to the grids. Okay, for me, this is stability for the network. We are talking about low voltage right through. We are talking about voltage control from the plants. Okay, we are talking about ramping control of the active power. Okay, and I am open to resolve, but for me, this is not flexibility. Okay.
Excellent to hear this viewpoint and important to understand, because basically you are running this. You need to define what is flexibility. But let's also hear from a technology provider's point of view. And before we come to the scientific assessment by Rafael later on, let's hear from Raul Montano, the Global Solutions Manager for Hydrogen at Hitachi Energy. What's his point of view here? What technical solutions, what solutions are emerging to help hydrogen projects to connect more efficiently to the grid and to overcome this situation, to provide possibly more flexibility, also in the sense that was just mentioned by Carmen, whether through modular substations, hybrid configurations, or flexible connection schemes. I think that's why I took you now to basically respond directly to Carmen. Raul, you have the floor, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Jorgen, and greetings from Tokyo. Well, it's a very, very challenging discussion and conversation, of course, from both sides of the table. the least that we want is just to have another situation like the one that we had in Spain a few months ago. Definitely what we are looking after is just to have a secure and stable electricity system and grid system. And of course, these days, everybody's talking, we should not only talk about hardware. Of course, hardware is fundamental. We have different solutions that it could help to stabilize the system, that it could provide different services towards the grid, that it could help to maintain the voltage or support with a reactive power compensation, to support with what we call grid forming components. All right. But at the same time, we also need to think on the digital piece. Today, we're in the digital era where there is a massive amount of data. There is a good set of models that it could be used also to forecast energy use and consumptions, that those could also help to implement and to mass scale hydrogen infrastructure. Here we're talking about, let's put it in simple terms, how we could use effectively electricity from the point where you generate the green electron to the point where you need to consume it. In between, you might face bottlenecks that you need to untangle, and that is where different solutions that Hitachi Energy, Equalab, and many other vendors could help and support the grid. But at the end of the day, we also need to think what will happen when that clean electron reach the plant. How we could also help the overall infrastructure and the grid connection to make it stable. We need to have an open dialogue where we could really understand what are the different requirements and components. We also need to be mindful that in here we're talking about an electrochemical process that is totally different than many other segments that are more electricity based, like mobility or data centers, where you could somehow slow down the process without major impact into the plant or into the processes. In here, having a small shutdown, it could be just simply purge the system completely and lose production downstream. So those kind of concepts need to be analyzed and discussed. And then, of course, understanding how, in case of emergency, we could safely disconnect the load. We have also means by power electronics where it could support that safety disconnection and restarting, as Carmen point out, to get the grid to the point that we want. There is a bit of a, I wouldn't say disagreement, maybe it's a point of view. It's how the industry is used to see electricity. And that is potentially where the term flexibility is highly important. The industry in the past is used to the gas power supply, where you just simply run system 24/7, 365, because we were not too much paying attention to the carbon footprint that the electrical infrastructure was having, and therefore we were a bit spoiled. So we were just simply running processes at the maximum speed, maximum production all the time. In here, we are now talking about systems that need to be adaptable and flexible to the generation in cases that you need to ramp up or ramp down. And again, this is where digital solution could help, because you have what I call the triangle. You have means to store electricity, you have means to store hydrogen, or you have means to store at the end product, downstream processes. So all those three different elements need to be well coordinated and be a very well-oiled machinery that it could help us to really make good use of the electricity. So we will not be having forced to have curtailment or to actually maybe reduce production because the grid is not on a stable post.
Many thanks, Raul. Very helpful to understand. Complex system we heard, all machinery that needs to work together. Thanks for this. Come back to you, Raúl. Let's now listen to a scientific point of view from Rafael, who is adjunct researcher at Universidad Pontificia Comillas. There has been, Rafael, an increase in ancillary costs, not only in Spain, but it's also especially in Spain since the blackout. Also with an increase in electrification, there will there will be a surge in network tariffs and connection charges. How can these affect the economics of electrolysis? We talked about the strong connection between electrolysis and the electricity prices, of course. How significant is this impact from your scientist view, and what adjustments could regulators make to better align costs with system benefits? We also have in the chat one question that goes into that direction. You might cover this as well. That says the necessary renewable oversizing, which we need, I alluded to what the commissioner said, means increased upfront capex. And this is not financed by commercial banks or EU funds at the moment. So what can we do? What can we do in order to bring costs down, but at the same time to ramp basically the grid up? Rafael, you have the floor.
Okay, not an easy one. Thank you, Jorgo.
Easy one, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let me start from the question from the audience, because we've kept track of the evolution of hydrogen production projects in Spain. And what we do see is, let's say, diversity in terms of strategies, so to say, in terms of power supply. We see indeed some projects that go, let's say, in island mode, not island, but they have a smaller grid connection for auxiliary services and these kind of things, but they rely mostly on the dedicated plant. To me, that is a strategy because of a failure. I mean, if we have problems in accessing grid capacity, or we have excessively high network charges or other costs that are paid by final demand, then in order to kickstart our projects, we go for this dedicated island. But in principle, this shouldn't be the best solution for our cases. Okay, so and even then, we do need some grid connection basically to stabilize, because the electrolyzer might not be run second by second on the actual output of your dedicated plant. So I would argue that grid connection is necessary, and we are discussing whether or not, depending on my oversizing of the dedicated plant, I need a larger or smaller access capacity. Having said that, let me go back to the issue of the impact of all these regulated costs on the economics of hydrogen. I would say that, Jorgo, you answered this question yourself in your introductory speech, because you saw one of these figures, and I think you said that grid fees may account for above €1 per kilogram of hydrogen, 1.2, 1.3, which is a lot. Okay, so that is essentially the answer. It can have a huge impact. But let me say that I think that maybe grid fees might not be the biggest concern for the time being, because for two reasons. And let me try to elaborate. First, network costs are about to increase, and we're discussing about the need for grid reinforcement and the challenges for that. But what is seen from a negative side, that reinforcing takes time. In this case, it is positive in the sense that reinforcing, building new network assets and commissioning them, which are then transferring to the network charges, takes time. So this gives us time precisely to achieve what you just described, to enhance electrification and the network charge, which in the end, very basically, is the ratio between the network cost and the demand that has to pay for this cost, grows in parallel, develops in parallel, then the network charge is kept under control. Okay, so that is what I see going forward in network charges. But we've seen a bigger increasing concern regarding the cost of the ancillary services. And a big part of the increase in these ancillary services is precisely technical constraints, grid and system operation constraints. And also you use some figures in your introduction, Jorgo. If I remember correctly, you said that in a matter of a few years, total grid congestion's cost in Europe had ramped from around 5 billion euros to above 22 billion euros in a matter of a few years. So there is a huge, quick increase. And in the end, these are costs also borne by the final consumers, the final demand. To give you an illustration, let's say closer to home, in Spain, the cost of technical constraints from January to October in 2025, the average was 15 euros per megawatt hour by hour. But we also had some hours where this cost was about 50-something euros per megawatt hour. And this is only basically calculated hour by hour and paid by the demand in that hour. So what happens is that you see some very huge technical constraint cost in hours with little demand, because maybe you have to switch on a couple of CCGTs. There is a little demand in that hour, because maybe it's an off-peak hour, and then you have a huge cost for each megawatt hour in that hour. So imagine you consume electricity from the grid with your PPA at 40, 50, 60 euros per megawatt hour, and then afterwards you're asked to pay almost as much for the technical constraints in that hour. So that increase indeed ruins the economics of hydrogen. So what can we do to mitigate this grid congestion cost? First, and the impact. Of course, reinforcing the grid is part of the solution to reduce this cost, but it takes time. In the meantime, there are some midterm and short-term solutions like flexibility. And then this has also been discussed. Flexible connections, flexible mechanisms can essentially shift consumption or generation from some hours, or storage from some hours, and mitigate this cost. But also, something we've been observing in some countries is to change the way we transfer this technical constraint cost or grid congestion cost to the demand. Because right now in Spain, we pay it on an hourly by hourly basis on an ex post, and these are completely ex post. Some countries, they are shifting to an ex ante type of approach. So in that sense, you are able to plan your operation as an electrolysis plant. So this is stabilizing the economic signal. So we should not forget about the economic signals in short term. And that is more or less, in a nutshell, a message.
Clear message. Thanks very much indeed. Let's return to Ireland, basically to compare now the knowledge we got from Spain with the Irish approach. When Jared, when balancing affordability with hydrogen support, how can governments ensure hydrogen brings real macroeconomic savings? Because we heard a lot about money that is lost or investment that is lost to the energy system rather than additional costs. Do you see a role of hydrogen in supporting the adequacy of the electricity system? This second round, we need to be shorter. We have 20 minutes and we are 6 speakers. So, Jared, you might bring in the Irish view.
I'll keep it succinct. I was really struck by some of the other speakers. Some common themes came out there was around integrated system planning. And when you mention hydrogen and affordability in the same sentence, it doesn't really sit well with people. How can hydrogen be affordable? But what we've seen, and this is the importance of the hydrogen decarbonized gas market package, and that particular Article 55, which is putting a mandate on electricity and gas and hydrogen network operators to do joint scenario planning. And from the work we've seen to date, we can see in projections, curtailment is going to increase dramatically in Ireland. And we've seen an investment of €3.5 billion in electricity network to try and limit that. But when we get beyond the 2030 targets and increase in renewables, we're going to see a massive increase in curtailment as well. When hydrogen can provide a solution to that. But when we dial all those parameters into the integrated system model, we're seeing that with hydrogen included in it, there's a consensus across these models that it is a cheaper overall system. So the message that, I'll keep it brief, but the message that we're really trying to progress and make sure it's correct, because it's a message that we're really latching onto, is that the overall electricity system is far cheaper with hydrogen involved and included, and that we should compare an energy system in terms of its total costs per terawatt hour delivered over a year, rather than be focused on what's the individual technology costs for deploying hydrogen on €1 per megawatt hour, because then it will never look attractive. It will always get derogatory focus and attention, but overall the benefit it brings far outweighs any of the cost that it incurs when it is deployed, because it won't be deployed very often in comparison to the fossil fuels that it's been displacing today. It will do a similar job, but used a lot less at the time.
Very interesting and short message. So hydrogen can bring down the cost, or will bring down the cost. That's the message. I would like to come back to Carmen, because there have been hydrogen projects that are in the Spanish system. So Spain has recently taken a leading role by planning around 13 gigawatt of grid capacity for hydrogen. What were the main considerations behind this decision, and how is REE planning to integrate them into the grid planning. You mentioned already a few things on that. Concrete question, are electrolyzers expected to consume electricity in a constant way, or rather to create more flexibility? We heard about your flexibility, but what's the role of electrolyzers here?
Okay. Yeah. Well, indeed, we have launched. Well, the ministry has launched a public consultation on the first proposal for the National Network Development Plan, which Horizon 2030. This is a process led by the ministry, and we here Red Eléctrica acts at. We have the role of technical advisor. Okay. And well, I would say it is a collaborative process, because we receive proposals from anyone, okay, and they are analyzed, and then this first proposal is done, right? In this process, we have seen for the first time an exponential increase of project demand, of projects of demand. We have seen small demands, electric vehicle, heat pumps connected to distribution, but also very huge, okay, connected to distribution, to transport, or transmission that we have to allocate. Okay, we are talking about industry, data centers, and of course hydrogen. Okay, so why 12 gigawatts? Okay, because our national integrated energy climate plan includes these 12 gigawatts, and here, well, the guideline principle is to allocate these 12 gigawatts. Okay, it's a number that is hard to believe. Okay, but I can say that we have received more proposals for more than 70 gigawatts. Okay, so we have had to select projects. Okay, and also the guidelines here said, okay, how to select more mature projects. Okay, and it's a matter of readiness, permissions already issued, I don't know, access to water that has been confirmed, national or European funds. But we have selected a criteria, geographical areas where we saw that those projects were more mature. Okay, and we have tried to reinforce these areas of the grid, new substations, new lines. Okay, just to be able to give power to these areas. Okay, in Spain, well, after the planning procedure, the who gets the permissions is something that is resolved by the access and connection permission procedure. This is quite regulated. Olivia has said just a hint. Okay, but this is quite regulated because it is very competitive procedure. Okay, quite very regulated and also very supervised. Okay, now we have auctions for some projects, and what is quite complex, but very regulated. Regarding the operation, which considerations? We consider firm access, okay, but we consider a profile of operation that is not an entry to the model. Okay, this is not a fixed profile. It is just a result of the market results of the simulations of the optimization. Okay, it is coherent with the delegated act. Okay, and we are considering that is green hydrogen. Okay, we are aligned with an ENTSO-E, price based. Okay, and of course this is the profile. Then the consumer will consume, and we will have to adapt the grid. Okay, because for us it's grid permission that is firm already, not flexible, right?
Excellent, thanks. A clear answer. Fantastic to see how many applications there have been. So that's good. That shows how important this sector might evolve. Let's now move from the Spanish perspective to the European, to Edwin again. Edwin, who can speak on behalf of ENTSO-E, where you definitely also are collaborating with Carmen. So the congestion management that we have heard and that we discuss here, and the negative prices are growing challenges in Europe's power system, we all know. What are the demand, response, and flexibility needs the electricity system would require, and how hydrogen could help out of ENTSO-E's perspective? How can we help to overcome those? You've heard now so many examples, especially from Spain. Can we compare this to other parts of Europe, and what would you suggest the hydrogen sector to do?
Yeah. No, all good points. Yeah. Perhaps to first reflect on what Jero had said. Let's get out of the simplistic conversation. Perhaps hydrogen should be part of the future energy mix, and a system including hydrogen is more cost effective than completely disregarding it. All simulations, all studies keep showing this one. That's definitely understood. But when it comes to flexibility, it's a bit of a heavily loaded term. Also, Carmen mentioned this earlier already. It's always a bit the side effect of any large system study that you see an outcome with capacities and patterns and so on, and you keep wondering what actually is needed in the system and which capability or which flexibility mechanism is actually at risk here. So a number of studies we've done at European level is actually to confirm how do we see flexibility evolving over the coming years via various metrics, can be based on ramping constraints, variable renewable surplus, shortages, all those kind of elements. And pretty much we see in the coming 5 to 10 years, a doubling of flexibility would be needed. There's something needed in the system. Now, what kind of flexibility are we talking about? Let's perhaps skip the operational aspects. If it's short duration flexibility, electrolyzers, depending on specific capabilities and technical requirements, they should be able to do it. But as I said in my earlier intervention, you're competing heavily with batteries, with demand response, with interconnection, and that's something to be taken into account. But in the doubling of flexibility needs we see across the board, across Europe, also for long duration flexibility, something is needed. It will double over the coming years. And how much alternatives are there then for hydrogen? Hydro storage, I would assume, but apart from that, unless batteries really go into the hundreds of hours, there's not much else which can be applied there, of course. And as much as a power system planner, I would like to say interconnection of the system is one of the greatest strengths we can have in Europe. It helps solidarity, it helps drive down costs, it helps interconnection and so on, diversification. If at some point you have simultaneous scarcity across borders, even interconnection will not help you out. And that's where hydrogen has a role to play. But then you come to the last point I want to make. Will it come by itself? Earlier, already you heard a few people saying you need to have the incentives there, the business case to make it. And this is when we end up with a story of a very inconvenient truth. We spoke about the T1EP earlier, our 10-year network development plan. We have also the flip side study at SWE level, the European Resource Adequacy Assessment, looking 5 to 10 years ahead. Let's see how the market could play out. Will the market deliver an investment, and will we have sufficient resources to keep the lights on? And even looking at I would say basic storage, a bit of demand response, gas turbines, we see a lot of them exiting the system unless a bit of smart intervention is done in the system itself. And then let's talk about hydrogen. Presumably at the moment still at higher costs. Will they be in the market, yes or no? So there needs to be some kind of investment incentive there to make all of this happen. Last point I want to make is just a reflection on what Olivia said earlier. I'm happy that already Carmen responded to it. A lot of scarcity in the system, a lot of investors competing for connection. It can take a lot of time, but just to be clear about it, it's not a TSO who's the arbitrator about who can connect first. You don't want to compete with a hospital or a school, to put it that bluntly, of course. This is why regulators and policymakers need to set the right criteria to make sure there's a fair mechanism for who can access earlier, of course. So at least to share those few thoughts. Thanks.
Strong points. Many thanks. Helps to understand, but also thanks for reminding that hydrogen needs to be a part of this cost reduction scheme. Raphael, let's come back to the idea of the flexible connections and dynamic tariffs. Could you elaborate on how these mechanisms could help integrate hydrogen more efficiently? While keeping operational costs manageable. You started to talk about it. Maybe you want to explore a little bit more.
Yes, of course. In essence, these are both mechanisms whose aim is to use the existing infrastructure more efficiently and more effectively, because we've seen the challenges of reinforcing the network. So what does this mean for hydrogen production? In the end, as usual, it's time and money. You avoid or reduce grid connection cost, and you should achieve to be connected early to the grid and hence start operating earlier, and your project becomes basically more bankable. Those are the implications. In terms of maturity, I would argue that flexible connections are no-brainer. My colleagues have also mentioned a couple of times that in Spain we're moving forward with this, maybe not as fast as some would like, but this is a no-brainer, is moving forward. With dynamic network charges, this is a bit trickier because we still haven't figured out, as far as I know, what is the right level of time granularity and geographical granularity to set the dynamic network charge. Dynamic, by definition, changes from time to time. So is this day ahead or is this exposed? And if it is exposed, then this is creating some uncertainty. The other question is, what is the amount of the economic signal? Should all network costs be recovered through this dynamic charge? Or we have some residual cost and it's only a potential incremental cost that should be conveyed through this charge? So there are many unanswered questions in the implementation of dynamic charges. So they are a promising mechanism, but I would say we should start testing flexible connections, which to me are no-brainer.
Excellent. Thanks for this good analysis. Let's come back to Raúl. To the technology point of view, many people are skeptical on how hydrogen technology can contribute to grid and system efficiency. We heard that also to a certain extent in that talk here. How can your systems that you produce enable a secure grid connection and help manage congestion and overall system operational and cost efficiency? You are at the moment in Japan, you said, so Japanese have similar problems, even if less, because they have less renewables. But maybe you can compare. How can you help?
Yeah, when we come to electricity, we need also to think about it. It's where you're going to have the point of injection. So it's all about the flow of energy across the overall system, and having a good understanding how you could control those. You could help to minimize the losses. That's one point. So the minute you untangle a bottleneck, that it could enable a consumption, that it will be local, and it could potentially also help the hydrogen infrastructure, then you could minimize the losses across the overall system. That's one of the examples. The second example that we need to think of, thinking on all those bottlenecks that you could have across the network, is that to produce hydrogen, you need a DC current. DC current is produced by means of power electronic. And having the right power electronics design in the system, it could also provide grid services. It could also help to untangle those pieces that potentially it could give a risk, or it could result in an increased losses in the overall system. So understanding and having the right equipment that it could help to get the balance of electricity across the overall grid, and having those different infrastructure. We're not talking about one single project of the 15 gigawatt concentrated in one point. It could be in one region, it could be across a country. And then if you have all those different components across a country, again, having the digital platform where you could forecast where the load could be, where are the bottlenecks, how you could optimize the overall energy usage, and then, of course, in some cases, have a local consumption to minimize the impact of those excess of electricity, it could immediately have an impact into the overall cost of electricity.
It's possibly also an answer to a question we have here in the chat. So you answered it already by Vincent Meunier, who says there's also another industry, the chlor-alkali industry, that also uses electrolyzers. Yeah. That has been in place for decades and is already a huge consumer of electricity. Sooner or later, chlor-alkali electrolysis and hydrogen electrolysis, he says, will compete for electricity. So it sounds reasonable to consider a collaboration to source wisely the electricity and learn from that industry. So I think that goes into the direction that you just described, and it's a good point. Thank you.
Yes. Just a piece, maybe if we just stretch a bit of the mile, this is what I always said, where is the biggest competitor for hydrogen? And it's not among the people that is across the industry. It's across all the different decarbonization processes that today have a huge need of renewable electricity, green electrons. So you are talking. We hear about data center. We hear about mobility. We have hydrogen. The alkaline processes on metal and mining. So how we could efficiently have managed all those is how we could potentially help the industry to grow. And that is where all these power electronics, as a highly pointed, could help to untangle those issues.
Yeah, I think Edwin also alluded to that fact that there's a big competition out there.
Of course.
Yes. Let's come to, last but not least, of course, to Olivia again, where you wanted also to continue to explain your view how hydrogen can deliver flexibility, balancing reserves and ancillary services to the system. And I think you have also a particular example. However, there was a question in the chat about the transport target in RED 3, which is very important, I think, for especially your projects. Is there any explanation why the Spanish government is delaying basically the transposition of that law into Spanish law? Because that's a precondition in order it to create a demand situation that would create basically level playing field also in Europe. Maybe you can answer this question as well.
Well, I have to answer out of comments, your question, and a lot of comments during this time that has passed since I first intervened. Well, capacity allocation is something is a process completely tremendously regulated and managed by the ministry, directly by the ministry, directly by the administration. It's not the TSO. That's clear. The TSO is managing the system, is managing flexibility. That, from my point of view, is flexibility traditionally given by the generators, generators that have had to monitor what was happening in the system and react to the request given by the TSO. And that is why, from our opinion, electrolyzers should not be considered as a traditional demand, but rather should be allowed to undergo the same qualification tests as generators in order to provide ancillary services, if they can provide them. And again, passing these tests will not depend only on the intrinsic flexibility of the electrolysis modules. That is something that Raúl has mentioned, but also on mainly on the overall design of the project. If the project as a whole is designed to be able to offer flexibility in the point in which it connects with the transmission network, that is our case. We have tried to design our project to be able to provide that flexibility, then electrolyzers will indeed be able to provide flexibility. In return, this flexible project should not be required to pay grid tariffs or constrained solutions, unlike power generators. This creates a strong incentive to invest, to be designed in order to provide flexibility to the system. Finally, regarding your question, the Spanish transposition, well, I would say that Spain is not the only one somehow reviewing the first draft. Germany, for example, 2 weeks ago modified the draft. And what it's been done in Spain is a kind of open consultation with the sector in order to take the right decision. Of course, we need demand. That I would say that because this market, this hydrogen market, is regulatory driven, there is no a clear demand because hydrogen is more expensive, electrolytic hydrogen more expensive than gray hydrogen. We need signals from regulation. It's clear, but at the same time, it has to be properly designed. So they are working on it. And in parallel, I'm going to come back to the first thing. If we are not allocated the connection capacity to the grid, although that directive is transposed to Spain, we cannot start producing hydrogen. So we have several problems in parallel to be solved in order to make these projects a reality. It's not only a matter of the renewables transposition.
Muchas gracias. Thanks very much. That was a very, very strong discussion in our hydrogen talk today. I'll try to summarize because we need, as we understand, need to create the right conditions. Please go to the next slide. The right conditions for the hydrogen and power sector. And we have these 3 points. We need grid priority access to strategic projects. We talked about that. We need reduced grid tariffs, and we need to place system integration at the core of network planning. I think that was a pretty clear message during this talk. And what is the EU planning in the final quarter of this year? The grids package will be basically unveiled. And then in the first quarter of 26, we wait for the electrification action plan, the clean investment strategy, and the white paper on electricity integration. And of course, the hydrogen sector wants to support all this. And this is why this hydrogen talk today was so crucial, because we gathered information, and I hope we could also give to our audience some information about how this can be done even better. Thanks very much. Our next hydrogen talk, the upcoming talk, is about sustainable fuels. 100 billion euro for green fuels. What STIP? That's the Sustainable Transport Investment Plan of the EU. What STIP means for aviation and shipping. Tuesday, 11th of December. Please mark that already in your calendars. Like always, 3 to 4:30. Thanks very much for today. Thanks to all the panelists. It was great to have you, and see you 11th of December. Bye-bye.